Long ago, in the quiet village of Meba, where the sun rose slow and the cows returned home on their own, lived a young woman named Tabita. She was known for her quiet ways, her love for books, and a beauty that shone gently, like a pot that had been scrubbed clean. Tabita had dreams larger than Meba could hold. After finishing secondary school, she left the village and traveled to Nabi, determined to make a life for herself. She worked as a secretary in a logistics firm while attending evening classes in international business. It was there that she met Li Wei, a soft-spoken Chinese engineer who had come to Kenya on a long-term construction project. He was different, attentive, respectful, and fascinated by her knowledge of trade and politics. What started as friendship turned into love, and not long after, Tabita became pregnant. But life is rarely a straight path. When the project ended, Li Wei was called back to China. He promised to return, but as the weeks turned to months, his calls grew fewer and eventually stopped. Tabita wrote letters, emails, messages. Nothing came back. She heard through a friend that he had been married off by his family to someone else. Life became difficult for her, and her job let her go when her belly grew rounder. Friends who once shared jokes with her at lunchtime now avoided her eyes. In a city that once felt full of promise, Tabita became invisible. The landlord began knocking louder. She had stayed in Nabi longer than she could afford, hoping each sunrise would bring a message, a call, a sign from Li Wei. But none came. She sold her small TV, her blender, even the handbag Li Wei had once bought her from a duty-free shop. She watched her dreams shrink to the size of a cardboard suitcase. When the money finally ran out, she called a cousin back in Meba and asked if she could stay in the old mud house her grandmother had left behind. The journey back was long and heavy, not just with luggage, but with shame, regret, and fear. As the bus rumbled past familiar hills, she pressed her hand to her belly, whispering softly to the child inside. "They'll laugh, I know, but we'll be okay. I'll protect you." When she stepped off the bus at the dusty Meba stop, chickens scattered and children stared. She held her head high, though inside she felt hollow. She was no longer the girl who left with big plans and new shoes. She was Tabita, the one who went to the city and came back heavily pregnant and no husband. The wind in the village seemed to mock her too, carrying whispers before she even reached the gate. But she walked on, past familiar faces turned unfamiliar, into the cracked house that now echoed with memories and silence. And that night, in the same bed where she used to dream of a better life, Tabita lay awake, one hand on her belly, the other wiping away tears only the moon could see. Tabita gave birth on a Tuesday morning, just as the rain clouds broke open above Meba. She was alone in the old mud house when her labor began. The neighbor she called refused to help, mumbling something about foreign spirits and unnatural children. In the end, it was the village midwife, Mama Challo, who came, not out of kindness, but out of duty. She muttered under her breath the entire time. The baby girl arrived quietly, no wails, no drama. She opened her eyes, wide and curious, and looked around the room as if she had been here before. Her skin was soft and pale, her hair dark and fine. Her eyes were narrow and shaped like two tiny moons. Tabita looked at her daughter and whispered the only thing she felt. Yin, light in the dark. But when word spread that Tabita had given birth to a Chinese-looking baby, the village erupted. She went to fetch a Chinese souvenir. "Her baby doesn't even look like us. She's bewitched. She brought back a dragon's child." This is what happens when girls chase the city life. Children would run past her house shouting things like, "Chin Chong," or pulling their eyes sideways and laughing. Women in the market pinched their own babies and said loudly, "At least mine looks like her father." The men smirked when she walked by, whispering jokes that stung worse than slaps. Tabita tried to ignore it. She carried Yin on her back like any other mother, sung lullabies while sweeping the compound, and worked part-time at the village dispensary. But the mocking didn't stop. No one wanted their children to play with Yin. Teachers treated her like an oddity. Some villagers claimed she brought bad luck. After all, hadn't the river dried up the year she was born? Tabita stopped going to community meetings. She built a fence from old iron sheets and thorny branches to keep out both stray goats and stray gossip. Inside that fence, she taught Yin to read from old newspapers, to count using cowrie shells, and to stand tall even when no one clapped. Still, the laughter never stopped, but neither did Tabita. Yin, though quiet like her mother, was different from the other children. She spoke fluent English by age 7, loved fixing broken radios, and could recite all the countries in Africa. She walked barefoot like the rest, but dreamed of building things no one in Meba had ever seen. At age 12, she won a National Science Award after designing a low-cost water purifier using charcoal, banana fiber, and recycled bottles. The photo of her shaking hands with the Minister of Education made its way into every major newspaper. The villagers blinked as they surrounded the newspaper vendor to catch a glimpse of Yin on the front page. They whispered again, but this time the whispers were different, no longer sharp-edged with scorn. They were soft, hesitant, tinged with something almost like shame. "That's Tabita's girl? The one with the Chinese eyes. Eh, and she's going abroad soon. They said she was even on Citizen TV. She met the minister, you know, the real Minister of Energy, not these local ones." Old men who once scoffed at Yin now leaned on their walking sticks and nodded thoughtfully, as if they'd always seen greatness in the girl with the strange eyes. Women who had once pulled their children away from Yin now elbowed each other, trying to edge closer for a better view. The same mouths that had laughed now wanted to be associated with her and her mother. Suddenly, neighbours who once mocked her began inviting Tabita for tea. Churchwomen began asking her to join the women's group. Young mothers brought their daughters to sit with Yin and maybe learn something smart. By the time Yin was 18, she had secured a full scholarship to study environmental engineering in South Africa. The local chief gave her a public blessing, and the entire village turned out for her farewell. Years later, a tall, confident woman with a soft Chinese accent and strong African roots returned to Mbemba to launch a project, building solar-powered water systems for dry villages across the region. Yin stood beside her mother as they cut the ribbon, journalists and leaders watching. Tabita's hands trembled slightly as she held the golden scissors. The sun was bright overhead, and a gentle breeze tugged at the hem of her dress. Her eyes swept over the crowd, familiar faces, older now, some softened by time, others still wearing the same proud smiles they once used to hide their ridicule. She saw Mama Chalo, who had once delivered Yin without joy, now clapping with both hands and nodding. She saw the local pastor, who had once refused to bless her child, now wiping sweat from his brow and inching closer for a photograph. She saw women who had spat on the ground near her home now singing loudly in welcome, as if they'd always known Yin would become someone great. Even the chief, who had once skipped Tabita's baby naming ceremony, now stood at the front, sweating in his oversized suit and preparing to make a speech. The young boys, now teenagers, stared at Yin in awe. Where once they had mocked her with slanted-eye jokes and mimicked her accent, now they whispered among themselves, "She's so smart. I wish I knew how to fix solar like that. She even knows how to speak Chinese, imagine." And through it all, the name they once dragged through dust, Yin, now sat on their tongues like gold. They said it with respect, curiosity, even a touch of longing. And in that moment, a slow warmth bloomed in Tabita's chest. Not pride exactly, but something deeper. It was vindication, wrapped in the quiet strength of years lived under silence and stares. It was relief that every sleepless night, every cruel word, every rejected invitation had not broken her or her daughter. It was healing, like a deep wound, finally closing. She looked at Yin, tall, graceful, confident, her African bones and Chinese eyes shining with purpose. She was no longer the strange baby in a cloth sling. She was a woman now, building solar wells, solving the very problems the village once claimed were too big for women to understand. Tabita's throat tightened. She thought of the night she gave birth, of sweeping her compound while babies laughed at her daughter, of eating a gali with tears because there was no meat to give yin during a fever. And now they clapped. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. She stood taller, lifting her chin slightly, not in pride, but in peace. When the ribbon fluttered to the ground, cut clean by the blades, it felt like a release, not just of ceremony, but of years of shame and sorrow she no longer needed to carry. For the first time in a long while, Tabita smiled with her whole face. This smile rose from somewhere deep, from the girl who once dreamed beyond village borders, from the mother who had carried shame like firewood, and from the woman who had endured it all in silence. And they stood there, mother and daughter, hand in hand, as the village that once scorned them finally stood still in their light. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more stories.